I am on block number 10, and that means I am almost done with this quilt along. Hey friends, welcome back to my sewing room. My name is Becca, and in today's video, we are going to work on block number 10 for the Bright Side Quilt Along. This is a block of the month program that was included for free if you were a Sew Sampler member from April 2021 to March 2022. But don't worry, if you are watching this now and you realize this is a quilt you want to make, in the description box down below this video, you will find a link to each and every pattern for all 12 blocks plus the finish setting. So you can go grab those patterns and come back and watch the playlist start to finish and put this quilt together with me. As a gentle reminder, this is not my pattern, so I can't give you any of the cutting instructions. So what I've done is starched and cut all of my fabric according to the pattern instructions for block number 10, and we're going to pick up from there. This is the block that we're going to make. Looks pretty simple, and it's building on some of the techniques that we touched on in earlier blocks. Step number 1 wants us to take our fabric D square and all 4 of our fabric C squares and build an economy block or a square and a square block that's going to go in the center of block number 10. To do that, we're going to take all 4 of our fabric C squares and we're going to draw a line from corner to corner on the 45-degree diagonal on each one of these fabric C squares. This is going to allow us to do the stitch and flip method on each corner of that larger fabric D to basically set that fabric D on point. Now that I have the line drawn on the wrong side of my fabric C's, I'm going to first position 2 of these fabric C squares in opposite corners from each other, just like this. I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch just 1 or 2 threads to the right of that line. Now here's a little bonus tip for you. When you take this to the machine, after you take your stitch right next to that drawn line, if you scoot your needle over about a 1/2 inch, somewhere over here, you can take another seam, and then when you cut a 1/4 inch away from the seam that you took on these 2 pieces of fabric, you'll be left with a bonus 1/2 square triangle unit that you can turn into something cute. Once I have these 2 squares attached, I'm going to grab a ruler and I'm going to measure a 1/4 inch away from that drawn line. I'm going to cut this away and I have a bonus little 1/2 square triangle unit that I can use in a future project. Then I'm going to turn my block around and do the same thing to the other corner. And then I'll lay out my block on my pressing surface and gently fold over these 2 squares and press them down so that everything's laying nice and flat before I sew on the other 2 squares. Just using a hot dry iron when I do this. Now I'm going to repeat the steps that I took before to build out the points in the other 2 corners. Once I've sewn those on, I'm going to cut off my bonus 1/2 square triangle units, just like I did before. And then I'll flip over my press and cut mat, press these surfaces out. And there we have our square in a square shape. Now, when I did this, I did not add any extra size to the block. So if this pretty blue, this dark blue, started off as a 10-inch square, when I am done putting those corners on, this should still measure 10 inches square. In step number 2, we're going to grab 2 of our fabric A rectangles, and we're going to turn this center block into our center row by assembling each of our fabric A on either side of that center square. Now, when I do this, I'm going to take extra caution to sew with fabric A on the bottom and my economy block on the top. And as I'm stitching along this raw edge, right here, I can see where my threads are coming to an X intersection from where I put this little point onto the square. If I stay to the right of this X, then I won't lose my point when I sew that economy block into its row. As I approach that intersection, I'm just going to slow down and make sure that my needle is going to hit the right spot. Stitch very slowly if I have to, and then I can speed up. I'm going to grab the next rectangle, do the same thing to the other side. The instructions say they want us to press the seam out towards our fabric A rectangle, so I'm going to press it out with my hands first. And then I'll get my nice hot iron. And you can see my points look pretty good. Really happy about that. Step number 3 is to build the top and bottom row for the block. And so that's going to look just like this. We're going to take our fabric B squares and put them in the 4 corners for the block. And then we'll take our remaining 2 fabric A rectangles and put them in between those cornerstones. We're going to make this row, and then we're going to make that row, and then we're going to sew them all together into one big block. I just realized when I looked at the pattern, I actually made a mistake. The pressing instructions want us to press the top and bottom row with the seam going into fabric A. And that's just going to help our top and bottom row nest really nicely with our middle row. So I'm going to take a second to fix that. Now I'm going to assemble all of my rows together, and now the seams will nest together quite nicely. When I say that the seams are going to nest nicely together, what that really means is that when I'm taking the row and I'm putting it together, the seams are going in opposite directions. And so the bulk of those seams are going to come together and they're just going to kiss each other. They're not going to lay on top of each other, and there shouldn't be a gap in between them either. They should fit up against each other quite nicely. You can see if this is actually happening by peeling back your rows to see if everything's kissing next to each other, or you can rub the seam between your forefinger and your thumb. If there's a gap, you'll feel it. If it's extra thick, you'll feel it. And if it's exactly perfect, you'll feel it. What I usually like to do for smaller projects like this is just feel where that first seam is, hold that in place while I'm sewing, and then once I get my needle into that seam, I line up the next seam or the next point that I worry about, and I hold it with my fingers as I continue to sew down the seam. You, of course, could clip it, pin it, glue it, put a staple through it, whatever works for you. That's just the method that works for me. I will say when I get to bigger pieces, like if I'm trying to line up points on a whole row, a lot of times then I'll reach for some pins or clips, but for smaller blocks like this, I feel like I can handle it okay without pinning. When I'm putting these rows together, just like I did before, I'm going to sew with my economy block on top so that I can see that intersection where the threads come together. Now that our block is all sewn together, we're going to open this up, and it says that the seams should press to the outer rows. I like to press it out with my hand first, and then grab my hot iron and give it a nice, good, hot press. The last part of pressing the block is to give it one more shot of best press, because I bought stock in Mary Ellen's apparently. And this is just going to add a bit more body to our block, help reduce any fraying over time, and keep it from stretching and being distorted. Plus, if you get the scented best press, it smells phenomenal. So this is our block number 10 for the Bright Side Quilt Along. I am really enjoying my time in this quilt along. These blocks are easy to sew, definitely beginner friendly. And the kits we got from Fat Quarter Shop for this have absolute amazing generosity with their fabric cuts. I feel like I can make lots of oops and still recover. 2 more blocks to go, and then putting them all together to make the quilt top happen. So just a couple more videos and then the series will be wrapped up. If you liked what you saw here, don't worry, I've got a whole bunch more content for you. Linked up here at the top of the video, you'll see a little eye, and when you click on that, it'll take you to the playlist for all of the blocks in this entire quilt along. If you enjoyed sewing with me today, the best thing you can do to compliment me is to give me a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and leave me a comment down below. None of those actions cost a single penny from you, but they mean a whole lot to me, and they encourage me to keep making videos just like the one you just watched. Thank you so much, guys. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.